All right, so let's dive into something that's been fascinating me lately. How tech is, well, kind of shaking up the U.S. financial world
Yeah.
in a big way.
It's like a wild ride right now.
It really is. And I'm all about those stories where an industry gets totally flipped on its head.
Mm.
And the way fintech is becoming so central, you sent over a ton of articles on this, and honestly, some of it's way over my head.
Yeah.
I mean, AI making financial decisions, banks suddenly teaming up with startups, and then there's this whole neobank thing.
Right.
Luckily, we've got expert speaker here to be our guide because I need some serious explaining.
Well, let's just say keeping up with the money trail these days is a full-time job, but someone's got to do it.
No kidding. And one thing that struck me right away in these articles is this isn't just about having a cool banking app on your phone anymore.
Definitely not.
This is like a whole different way that financial services actually work, isn't it?
It really is, yeah. We're way past the era of just making things digital. This is about changing how these services are designed from the ground up, how they're delivered, even how people experience them, speed, making things personalized, and reaching those folks that traditional banks, frankly, haven't always served well. That's the name of the game now.
And you can almost pinpoint the exact moment things went into overdrive, right? I mean, the pandemic forced everyone online practically overnight.
Absolutely. It was a huge accelerator.
Yeah.
Suddenly, that clunky website your bank had wasn't just annoying, it was a deal breaker.
Oh, for sure.
Remember those first few weeks? Total chaos. Everyone scrambling to deposit checks without going inside a bank, needing loans instantly when businesses were hanging by a thread.
It was a mess.
Exposed exactly how outdated a lot of banking systems had become. In fintech, they were built for this.
They were ready.
Digital first is in their DNA.
Okay, so that brings us to the big question, right? Fintech versus the traditional banks. Are we headed for a financial showdown here?
I don't think it's one replacing the other, thankfully. It's more like adaptation.
Okay.
Banks, they've got the customers, the history, people trust them, but their systems, a lot of them are stuck in the past.
Yes, for sure.
Fintech, they're nimble, they can innovate fast, but they need to build that same level of, hey, you can trust us with your money,
So it's that classic tortoise and the hare thing, but with billions of dollars at stake.
Exactly. And the real race is, can these huge banks change their tech fast enough to keep up with how quickly fintech can move? That's going to be the make or break for them.
And let's be real, saying they need to update their tech is kind of an understatement when you look at what's involved now. It's not just about better apps, it's AI making decisions, blockchain. This is not how our grandparents banked.
Not at all. Yeah, and that's where things get really interesting. Imagine AI that catches fraud as it's happening, not after the damage is done. Or like you've got an algorithm that knows your spending habits better than you do.
Okay, that's both cool and creepy at the same time.
Right. But it nudges you towards actually making smarter financial choices. That's the kind of thing fintech's working on, that personalized experience.
That part does sound kind of amazing. But, and I gotta be honest, the idea of an algorithm handling my money also makes me a little nervous, Is it really safe to trust all this to technology?
I get it. It's a valid concern. And security, that's got to be job number one for both traditional banks and these fintech companies. They're pouring money into cybersecurity, encryption, constantly updating things. It's like the more digital our financial lives become, the more important those protections are, period. No two ways about it.
Which, I mean, makes sense, but it's still a lot of faith we're putting in these systems.
Right.
But you mentioned personalized experiences, and one thing that really jumped out at me in these articles, it's the rise of neobanks.
Yeah.
Like, what even are those? Where do they fit into all of this?
So neobanks, fascinating stuff. Think of them like the banks that were born in the digital age, right?
Yeah.
No physical branches, none of those old systems slowing them down.
Yeah.
It's all about the app, low fees, catering to people who basically live on their phones.
So, like, it's the banking equivalent of all those minimalist brands that are everywhere now, just for money.
Pretty much. And they're growing like crazy.
Intriguing, but are they? For real? Can you actually trust a bank that you can't even walk into?
That's the million-dollar question a lot of people have, right? Like any financial institution, neobanks, they got to play by the rules, have insurance, all that to protect consumers.
Right.
Same security standards, got to prove they can keep your data safe. All that's non-negotiable.
That makes sense.
The difference is how quickly they can adapt, how much they prioritize the user experience.
Okay.
Think about it. They've got features like you can see exactly what you're spending in real time. They've got tools that automate your savings. Traditional banks are scrambling to catch up.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a different ballgame.
One thing I notice, a lot of these neobanks have lower fees, better interest rates than the big banks. How do they swing that? What's the catch?
Not necessarily a catch. See, they don't have the costs of running physical branches, maintaining all those old systems, so they can pass those savings on.
All right.
Plus, the tech they use, it just lets them operate way more efficiently.
Lean and mean.
Exactly. It's a textbook case of how fintech is using tech to really shake things up.
Giving those old school banks a run for their money, huh? So are neobanks the future of banking then, or just a fad?
You know, it's still early to say for sure. They definitely appeal to, like, younger generations.
I just grew up with smartphones, yeah.
Exactly. They're comfortable doing everything digitally, and honestly, they're kind of over how limited traditional banking can be.
Right.
But neobanks, they still need to convince the majority of people that they're trustworthy, and they got to navigate all these regulations that are changing all the time.
And those traditional banks, I doubt they're just going to roll over, right? What are they doing to keep up in all of this?
They're starting to realize they got to adapt, and fast.
Yeah.
Lots of them are investing heavily in updating their tech, making their digital stuff easier to use, streamlining everything they do.
Makes sense.
Some are even, get this, partnering with fintech companies.
Really?
Yeah, either through investments or straight-up collaborations. They're realizing they can actually learn a thing or two from each other.
So less of a head-to-head battle, more like they're kind of merging together?
In a way, yeah. It's becoming pretty clear that the future of finance is going to be a blend of both traditional banking with that fintech twist. Each side using their strengths to create this like super dynamic, super competitive landscape.
Which in the end is probably good for us, the people using these services.
Exactly. Competition usually benefits the consumer.
We can't talk about the future of money without mentioning cryptocurrency, though, right? Like, is that ever going to be something we actually use day to day, or is it always going to be this, like, niche thing that only tech people get?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? But seriously, there's no question that cryptocurrency is becoming more, shall we say, mainstream.
It seems like it pops up everywhere you look.
Right. We're seeing big companies now accepting it for payments. Even some governments are experimenting with using it.
Interesting.
So it's definitely gaining traction.
But are people actually using it to buy things, or is it mostly just like an investment at this point?
It's a little of both, honestly. For a lot of people, it's still seen as an investment.
Yeah.
A way to diversify, potentially see big returns.
Right.
But we're also seeing this rise in what's called stable coins, which are pegged to something more, well, stable, like the US dollar.
Ah, okay.
Makes them much more practical for everyday transactions because you don't have that volatility.
Stable coins. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Takes away some of the risk.
Right. So yeah, cryptocurrency is definitely becoming more user-friendly, you could say. But there's still a lot to figure out in terms of regulation, security, all of that.
Especially with how fast things change in the tech world, the rules can barely keep up.
Tell me about it. But consumer protection, that's got to be priority number one.
Of course.
Regulators, they want to make sure these fintech companies are treating people fairly, protecting their data, being transparent about everything they're doing.
Which is tough when what they're doing changes so rapidly.
Exactly. Financial stability is another huge one. They don't want this whole fintech boom to end up destabilizing the entire system.
Right.
And cybersecurity, that's got to be top of mind too. Can't overstate how important that is in this digital first world.
It's like they're trying to, I don't know, write the rule book while the game's still being played.
Perfect analogy, which is exactly why it's so important for everyone to be paying attention, not just the regulators.
Absolutely. So given everything we've talked about, what's your one piece of advice for someone trying to make sense of their finances in this like rapidly changing world? What should they be keeping an eye on?
Honestly, stay curious. This whole space is evolving so fast. What seems cutting edge today is going to be old news tomorrow.
So no resting on our laurels when it comes to money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Keep up with the trends, read articles, don't be afraid to ask questions. The more you know, the better decisions you'll make about your own finances.
Right. Knowledge is power, as they say. Well, expert speaker, I think we've covered a ton of ground here on this deep dive into fintech and banking. It's clear we're just at the beginning of some major, major changes.
Well, absolutely. Just getting started. The next few years in finance, going to be wild. I predict a lot more innovation, maybe some bumps along the way.
Exciting, and maybe a little bit scary at the same time.
Yeah.
Expert speaker, this has been incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for walking us through all of this.
My pleasure. Always happy to geek out about the future of money.
And to our listener, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of fintech and banking. We'll be back next time with another fascinating topic. Until then, happy investing.